Good afternoon, and welcome to the Department of Environmental Protection's Environmental Education Grant Writing Strategies webinar. Hopefully, third time is the charm. For those that have hung in there, I appreciate it. We'll be joined today by some individuals that are in this office with me from the Environmental Justice Office, Allison Escovedo and John Brakall. And we also have a representative from the Grants Office and Michelle Devaney. I'm Bert Myers, Director of Environmental Education for the Department of Environmental Protection. And we're going to run you through the grant writing strategies to assist you with your application for the 2019 DEP Environmental Education Grant Program. Good. Everything good so far? Mm-hmm. First, let me give you a little background. The Department of Environmental Protection's Environmental Education Grant Program was established by the Environmental Education Act of 1993. It is funded by 5% of the fines and penalties that are paid to this agency. It is a mandated DEP responsibility, and in the last 25 years, we've awarded more than $12 million to further environmental education in Pennsylvania. And there are the purpose of the grant is to promote environmental education at local and statewide and regional levels. The general grants are for large-scale, high-impact regional or statewide initiatives. The mini grants are for your more localized projects. So a common question I've received is, what are the general grants and mini grants? And I'll get into that. And can I apply for both? And the answer is, yes, you can. So I'm going to start with an overview of the grant track for the general grants. These grants are up to $25,000 for a one-year project. So all of the grants in this year's initiative is a one-year project. The specific dates for the projects begin July 1st, 2019 and conclude June 30th of 2020. There's a focus on priority topics, which I will be reviewing here shortly. The general grants are for high-impact, large-scale, regional, or statewide initiatives. And the project features with specific components, which include a 20% match. This is a reimbursement-only program. Funds must be spent in the budgeted fiscal year. There is no rollover of funds. The general grants also require a progress report by December 15th of 2019. Now, the other grant track is the mini grants. That is up to $3,000 for a one-year project. The dates are July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. It's a localized project focused. So any size projects eligible, for example, a school field trip or an environmental improvement to the school grounds, those are all certainly eligible for this mini grant program. In the mini grant program, the match is not required. This grant, you are eligible for advance payment if your application is approved, and the only reporting you'll need to do would be the final report only. So what are the priority topics? There are three. They are the same as last year, and that priority topics are climate change, water, and environmental justice. First, let me discuss climate change. These are public education campaigns, emissions, and public health. Education projects demonstrate and encourage the reduction of engine idling, conserving energy, sustainable schools, alternative fuel transportation, and renewable energy. Climate adaptation projects can include tree or riparian buffer plantings and water quality monitoring. Concerning water as a priority topic, the primary focus is reducing non-point source pollution and others, including agricultural nutrient management, abandoned mine drainage and reclamation, water conservation, stormwater management, private water wells and groundwater, road salt, citizen science and volunteer water quality monitoring, cold water habitats and fisheries, and habitat restoration as another example. In terms of environmental justice and as a priority topic, we're talking about proper HHW disposal and green cleaning, promotion to promote alternative transportation, demonstration projects, citizen involvement projects, for example, stormwater education or improving water quality, how-to trainings about DEP and public participation, and connect to nature and urban environment for inner city students, including hands-on stewardship projects. An obvious question we receive often is my organization eligible to apply? So let's address that right now. Eligible applicants include public and private schools and school districts K-12 located within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Eligible applicants are also college and universities, intermediate units, environmental education centers, nonprofit conservation and education organizations and businesses, and county conservation districts. When do I find out if I'm funded? So in a moment, we'll share with you the important dates for this grant round for 2019. And here's your timeline. So the grant round is currently open. Applications can be submitted before this date, will not be considered, but as of November 2nd, the grant round is open. So you can, if you have not already, you can send your application in. This has to do with this being rescheduled for a third time, but December 7th, there was an optional one-page email summary that was due. Again, it was optional, and you see the email address there to send that proposal to. January 11th is probably the most important date relevant to today, and that is that January 11th, 2019, by 11:59 p.m., applications must be submitted by this date. And then, which is typical of this grant program's history, the April 22nd, 2019, the awards will be announced on or around Earth Day, and then the actual projects that have been approved and the grants that have been awarded, the actual work date where you can begin is July 1st of 2019. And then this is for the general grant awardees, that December 15th, 2019 is when your progress report is due, and June 30th of 2020, the general grants will be complete. Again, there was no time extensions. Mini grants have to be complete on that same date, and again, there is no time restrictions, or time extensions, I'm sorry. So, putting them side to side to make sure that we're clear, the general grants, the progress report, there is one that you will be responsible for if you're awarded a grant, and that progress report is due December 15th, 2019. Final report, July 15th, 2020. As I mentioned previously, the mini grants, there's no progress reports required, and the final report is due the same date as the general grant, July 15th of 2020. Okay, so there's also some project options. First, let me address the non-formal environmental education projects. They can be directed towards any target audience. I will emphasize again the priority topics of climate change, water, and environmental justice. For youth programs incorporating academic standards, for example, the environment and ecology standards and STEM are looked upon favorably. General grant applicants, this again, I want to emphasize the difference between the general and the mini grants, not only in dollars amount, but the general grant applicants, one of the requirements is to promote the project at a statewide conference. Include a strong technology component. There's our STEM connection. This is key as well, is plan to sustain the project after the funding ends. Partnerships are key in these relationships, and evaluation components to assess impact and metrics will be required. The mini grant applicants, a lot of times the grant applications are talking about hands-on supplies or field trips, or, of course, giving priority to environmental education projects on priority topics. For the formal environmental education projects, this is for projects that are going to be delivered within a formal K-12 school setting, public or private school or charter school. The priority topics remain the same: climate change, water, and environmental justice. Requires incorporation of academic standards in STEM. So there can be a variety of general grant applicants as far as angles for the grant. That would include teacher professional development, such as a workshop, integrating environmental education curriculum into your current curriculum, student-led action project on a local issue. For example, in the MeWe process, the action project is the culmination of the environmental education lesson. It can include multiple field experiences, relate to career development, also plan or required to promote the project at a statewide conference, includes a strong technology aspect of STEM, plans to sustain the project. Again, strong partnerships are important, and it requires a strong evaluation component as well. Some of the project options for K-12 schools include sustainable schools, that is reducing the environmental impact, school health, outdoor classroom. Topics can include energy efficiency and conservation, water quality and conservation, sustainable school transportation, waste and recycling, climate change, air quality including radon and integrated pest management. It could be energy teams using the Energy Stars portfolio manager, and also can include energy conservation plans with audits. So that's the sustainable school as far as a project option. There are some additional K-12 school project options that are available. That would be curriculum integration. That is the articulation of the environmental education standards, the K-12 curriculum for school district, charter, cyber school, or private school. The goal is for permanent change to improve the environment. The curriculum revision, that would be revision or writing lesson plans and units to meet changes in the approved alignment and provide classroom assessment. Okay, for the mini grant applicants, the K-12 school project options, pretty simple. Hands-on activities, supplies, field trips, could include teacher education and professional development, the attending of a workshop or a broader conference, and of course, again, environmental education projects on priority topics. And I'm going to hit you with them again. That is climate change, water, and environmental justice. This is a popular question. That is, what is ineligible? What is ineligible criteria? Clearly, if it's non-environmental education related or is a project that takes place or occurs outside of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it is not eligible. An organization's basic research, not eligible, as are the rest of these. Beautification and landscaping, for example, school grounds. That is not a rain garden. That's not what we're talking about. Beautification and landscaping is not eligible. If the organization has defaulted on prior environmental education grants, you're ineligible. Large-scale construction activities are ineligible, as are real estate acquisitions. Fundraising and membership drives are ineligible, as are political advocacy and ineligible budget items. Now, how do I obtain a grant? Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. First of all, some key points. It needs to be related to the environmental topics and/or standards. This is actually advice for putting together your grant application. Make your goals clear and your objectives clear. Make sure that your project's been well thought out in terms of activity steps that lead to goals and objectives, that you've got a reasonable budget, addresses all the components, it's a reasonable timeline and fits within the framework of this grant program. Project recruitment, and another key, obviously, is that the key people need to be highly qualified. How do I submit an application? Well, it's a little simpler than the bear trying to get to the bird feeder. I couldn't resist my past employment. So, first of all, this is all available on the eGrant system. The eGrants webpage is right there at the top, http://deppa.gov/EE_grants. So, contact information, the customer service number is listed here. The hours are 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. This office will also be monitoring the website that you see below, ra-dcedcs@pa.gov. Again, I'll emphasize the deadline to apply is 11:59 p.m. on January 11, 2019. More detailed instructions on the application process can be found in the 2019 Environmental Education Grants Program Manual. For additional information, you can contact me, Bert Myers, Director of Environmental Education at gimyers@pa.gov. My phone number, 717-705-3767, is listed. You'll get a chance to see this information, my contact information again. One of the things I did want to mention is that if you have any questions, that you need to submit them through the chat box in the lower right corner of your screen. And I'll also remind you that your mic has been muted, so if you're trying to talk to us, obviously we can't hear you. But I ask that the questions you submit through the chat box format, and we will address those questions at the end of the presentation. So this is an example of a stormwater teacher workshop as far as a mini grant project timeline. The project is entitled Weathering the Storm. So this is going over some upcoming ground in September 2019. You want to develop your workshop agenda. That's activity A. November of 2019, develop print recruitment brochure and evaluation tool. That's activity B. And by December of 2019, send recruitment brochure and promote program to formal and non-formal educators. That's activity C. Applicants submitting the optional one-page proposal summary must email it in or on before this date, and we discussed that previously. So then, continue with this example of the Stormwater Teacher Workshop. By March of 2019, in this example, that's when the actual workshop, Weathering the Storm, would be conducted, and that is activity D. In April of 2019, conduct follow-up assessment with educators attending the workshop and summarize the results. That is activity E. And of course, July 15th, 2020 is when the final report is required to be submitted, and list that as activity F. Now, to further demonstrate, I'm going to bring up a different looking screen. So this is the sample budget. You can see at the top, obviously, the applying organization needs to provide their name and the project director. But I do want to draw your attention to items that we get a lot of questions regarding. So when you're completing the budget category under people costs, you want to make sure you complete that, and that's the number of people hours are included that you see in that second, or actually third, section, third column. The activity letters go throughout the existence of this grant, starting with the environmental education professional that will be part of A and being at the beginning of the actual project and taking it the whole way through the project through E. That could vary. For example, in this scenario, you have the Land Development Association, the clerical fees that would be taking this project from only B to C. So you adjust your people costs with your activity letters based on which aspect of the grant they're going to be working on specifically, and also remind you to include the number of hours that are included, number of people and hours. The other question we get regarding the activity letters is, if you followed the previous screen, in this example, under resource costs, the rain barrels would fall under activity letter D. And anything related to that, like the water conservation DVDs, et cetera, they are part of that resource cost and part of that actual activity, so they require activity letter D. There can be other costs that may be incurred. Make sure they don't belong in the resource or the travel category or the people costs. So the correct budget category, if it doesn't fall into either people, travel, or resource costs, then it goes into other costs. I'll draw your attention to the other aspect of this is the match. So in your applying in your application, when you look at that next to last column, that is the matching funds amount. That is key for the general grants, not required for the mini grants. So this is what entails the award process and responsibilities. First is to finalize a signed agreement between DEP and your organization, and then you will be required to send benchmarks that outline the different steps and achievements of the grant project. As I mentioned before, the general grant for 2019 progress report will be due. What's important is in terms of reimbursements. First of all, please use the correct forms that are in the 2019 DEP EE grant manual or will be online. Requests and budget changes that are more than 10% will need to be sent to this office. An advance payment option is available for mini grants only. And if you do not expend all of the funds, a partial or complete return to the Environmental Education Fund is possible. And I'll reiterate again that there is no time extensions. This grant process ends in the beginning of July of 2020. So this is an example of Attachment D, which is your scope of work benchmarks as part of your budget, and this is a required submission. So it goes through each number in a progressive step with each benchmark description next to it, and then the completion date in the last column. It's a little hard for me to read this, but the benchmarks, it's pretty straightforward. You just want to go through the sequence of your project and list with the culminating activity and assessment if that's relative to your grant. So I'm putting up there again the contact information for myself, my email, and my office phone number. That is your access to the DEP Environmental Education Office. If you require assistance, this is where you can contact me. I'm going to leave the screen up here for now, and then we'll turn our attention to those questions that were submitted to us, and we'll answer them at this time. Okay, so the first question is one of the most common questions that I've encountered even prior to this presentation, and that is, when this is over, this presentation, is there any way I could get a copy of this slide or this PowerPoint? Yes, you can. Our plan is that we will go ahead and email all the participants that signed up for this webinar, and we'll send you a copy of the PowerPoint so you can have it in hand in your office. Okay, so the next question is pretty simple, but it's a good one, and that is, would building a rain garden be considered beautification? A functional rain garden is just that. It is not landscaping. It is not beautification. It is a water-based project, so it is a priority project, and this rain garden is designed to reduce sediment and nutrient loads into our streams in the Commonwealth. So it needs to be a functional rain garden, of course, but a rain garden certainly qualifies, would make an excellent mini grant project. If you're applying for a general grant, focus on sustainable schools, does the project have to align with one of the three priority topics? No, it does not. The Sustainable School Initiative is a little bit different, but again, priority topics are going to get rated stronger during the rating period, and so I suggest that you keep those priority topics in mind. The second part of that question was also, does the grant have to include curriculum integration revision, or is that separates from sustainable schools? I'm not sure I quite follow that, but if I'm reading that right, the curriculum integration or revision is separate from sustainable schools. It is certainly something you could include in your grant activities, but it's not required. So I'll be with you in a moment to address some additional questions. So I'm going to address a little more of a specific question, and that is this. Saw that beautification is not eligible, but this organization, school, are planning on rewilding a small courtyard for an outdoor classroom. It needs invasive species identified and removed, tree health analyzed, and appropriate native species identified and planted. And they are partnering with Audubon. That is definitely eligible for funding. Again, that sounds to me like a mini grant type project. And having done projects like that myself in the past, I'd suggest bird feeders are a great location when you're in those courtyards because predators generally can't get in there. My next question is, could a pollinator garden be funded? Absolutely. If you're putting in a pollinator garden to benefit bees, butterflies, all the above, that certainly qualifies. That is not beautification. Okay, so the next question that I received was asking about partners. Can you tell us a bit more about the partners and how they've worked with our schools? Well, first I'll tell you that the partnerships are encouraged and can be made among school districts, private schools, universities, county conservation districts, and other organizations to draw on the strengths of each entity. So a variety of organizations qualify as a potential partner. Again, it could be a conservation district. It could be a resource-based charities such as Trout Unlimited. All those are good. As far as partnerships, that's something that's strongly recommended, and it's part of the general grants program. So if any organization other than the grantee supplies any of the matching funds or is responsible for assisting or completing some of the activities, the organization must fill out and sign the partnering form that is included with the application. So if you have an organization other than the grantee, yourself, we need to have that information supplied in terms of matching funds and completion of the activities, and the partnering form that is part of the package needs to be completed. I will remind you that if a grantee plans to partner with another organization, the grantee will be legally responsible for scope of work, maintaining records, and submitting progress reports and expense reimbursement requests. Reimbursement or advance payments will only be payable to the grantee. Another specific question asked is, our local environmental action committee is very active and would also partner with us. I don't think I asked a question, but does that sound like a potential project? Yeah, it does. It sounds to me that you need to do a little more fine-tuning there and determine what aspect that the partnership might be able to help you with. And I would also get specific into what type of programming that Environmental Action Committee is very, let's say, good at, and if you wanted to piggyback on with their kind of success, if they're having good success with environmental education programs, that could be funded, and that would be eligible. The next question I received was, are there limits on the percentage of grant funds used for technology, such as apps and web portals? Well, the first piece of advice we'd recommend is that you don't spend the entire grant amount on purchasing apps. There is no specific limit on the percentage you can spend on technology, but the grant is going to be rated based on the ability of this grant to implement technology in an appropriate environmental education curriculum or program. I will remind you that things that the DEP EE grant will not fund is stuff like purchasing office equipment, purchasing software for your office computers. That is not technology that is going to push the grant forward, and it's not related to environmental education. The next question I received is, can I submit more than one mini grant application? Yes, you can. If more than one priority topic is addressed, yeah, that's fine. If yes, would the two grants be in competition with one another? Yes, they would. So if you're going to do due diligence on one and put together a really good application, I suggest you do it for both the same, and using the rating system developed by DEP, we'll select that we think is the best fit for this grant program, one that touches on the priority topics, and one that also addresses a localized environmental education or environmental challenge. Okay, so the next question I received was, can you define basic research in the ineligible criteria? What that means is that basic research addresses, if you're doing research that betters your organization, your company, your school, and it's part of improving, for example, day-to-day operations, that is basic research. But if the research is specific to the environmental education program, let's say, for example, again, we'll use that pollinator garden as an example. If you're doing research on which pollinators that you're trying to attract, what native plants to utilize, that is clearly and obviously, at least to me, okay and should be part of your grant application. Okay, so this is another good question I received, and I've gotten asked this quite a bit, and that is, are there specific guidelines or a minimum requirement that defines regional for the general grant? I know regional is a somewhat ambiguous term. What we're talking about there is, for example, a multi-county project incorporating more than one county, or if you're going to address in terms of school district, thinking in terms of broader than a specific school district, but multiple school districts. I received this question primarily in relation to general grant applicants, and so I'll remind you that the general grant is regional, so it needs to be larger than something within your building or district. Again, multi-county involved, but also it could be a region, say northeastern Pennsylvania, the Southwest, Laurel Highlands, whatever you're talking about. The other point is that if it's statewide, if it's Commonwealth project, that certainly qualifies as a general grant. Pay attention to the requirement that says that the project may require presentation at a statewide conference. Okay, so another question I received is, can you provide a few more examples of what types of mini-grant projects have been funded? Well, let's look at water. For example, water, buying equipment for a specific school, building, or district, or classroom to provide the equipment necessary to monitor a local stream. Maybe the stream is right there on your property, but that would be things like thermometers or boots or seine nets, nets in general, the chemical testing kits that are available. Any of those, or even if you're getting into the more technological side of it, STEM applications that are out there, or analyzing water qualities, those would be eligible as well. Other mini grant examples I can provide you, we got a variety. One was how to reduce air pollution through more efficient burning of wood-burning stoves, believe it or not. So it can run the gamut, but other things too are more typical, would be like a rain garden, an outdoor classroom, maybe a nature center development or a nature trail on the school grounds. Some of these could also be applied, for example, small stormwater projects that's rain barrels that are being affixed to each of the downspouts, something like that. Something that is small, that is close to the school building or school district in terms of not a broad project, but specific to a building, and also for something that's maybe you're an environmental education center, something that's going to be done there, program there at the center. Okay, so the next question I received would be, would grant cover time to do the work? It will. Let me get to that a little more specifically. We believe that what you're addressing are people costs. So, for example, if you're hiring a teacher in the summertime, you need to look at what you're going to pay for them at an hourly rate and number of hours that are going to be required to complete the project. So any work that is done specific to your grant project, what you estimate to be the time, the hours spent addressing that project are eligible for this grant program. The audience has been doing a great job on some excellent questions, including this next one, as if all the questions have been good. But can a nonprofit apply for a mini grant to create an outdoor classroom, or is that only for formal education institutions? No, that nonprofit can absolutely apply for a mini grant to develop and create an outdoor classroom. So that is definitely an eligible project. Again, I think you know what I'm going to say. We're going to be looking for that priority topics incorporated into that application. And we know what they are: climate change, water, and environmental justice. If you have any more questions, now is the time to submit them through your chat box. We'll give you a couple minutes to do so. If we don't see any additional questions, we're getting close to the conclusion of this webinar, but we'll give it a couple minutes and see what we receive. Okay. So I did receive another good question. Okay, and it says, we understand that we can apply for both a general grant and a mini grant. Can you apply for multiples of each? So if you wanted to apply for 2 mini grants and 3 general grants, you can certainly do that. You need to understand that these need to be projects that stand alone. There should be no crossover between these different projects. They have to be independent of each other. An entity that puts in multiple applications, you could be awarded multiple grants, but again, it's going to be dependent on the rating, which we're looking at, the priority topics, and also how well together the overall application is done and complete. I do want to remind you that if you're applying for multiple grants, that this is 1 year. Okay, there is no extensions. You have 1 year to complete the project. So just suggesting that you take a really hard look at the benchmarks and your timeline, that you can effectively complete multiple projects within that time frame. Because if it gets to the end of the grant period and that project's not done, you will not get an extension. So the questions continue to roll in. And another good question that was asked is, do we have examples of projects awarded that were related to the priority topics? For example, I do a lot with water, but I want to do more with climate change. In climate change, under priority topics in the manual, it does indicate that public education campaigns about emissions and ways to protect public health are also address climate change. But I think what you're talking about is education projects that demonstrate and encourage reduction in for example, conserving energy, sustainable schools, renewable energy. That renewable energy could be water related. Maybe it's a mini hydro project. A lot of the climate change does have to do with conservation. Some of the selective climate adaptation projects as part of a larger educational effort, such as tree plantings, water quality monitoring, riparian buffer plantings, and other related topics. Excuse me. So let me make sure that's clear, that last point, that climate adaptation projects that are part of a larger educational effort, which could include tree plantings, riparian buffer plantings, those are okay and a good way to incorporate the priority topics into your application. Can a nonprofit apply for a mini grant to create an, oh, I'm sorry, I already answered that one. Let's try this one. Would a municipal EAC be eligible to submit? And we're glad you got your audio back. So a specific question we received was, would a municipal EAC be eligible to submit? And I believe we're referring to an environmental action community. Municipalities are not eligible to apply in this grant program, but if you develop or become a nonprofit or partner with a nonprofit or partner with a school district, environmental education center, county conservation district, you're okay. So the next question I got is that if you haven't got nonprofit status, can you still get a grant? No. What you can do would be have a nonprofit organization that you bring on board. They apply for the grant, and you would partner with them. The second part of that question is climate change mitigation, such as stormwater retention, like the rain gardens, habitat revitalization, like a pollinator garden, do they qualify under climate change? They do. I would address that specifically, what your goals would be, objectives would be in terms of climate change and how that applies to your project, whether it's a rain garden or stormwater retention. Okay, so continue with the questions. Can donations of time be applied to the 20% match, assuming a reasonable labor rate? Yes, it can. Donations of time are acceptable, and you want to use the volunteer rate that you'll find on the website. Okay, next question. Would professional development workshops for K-12 teachers run by a nonprofit environmental education organization outside the school building be considered a non-formal EE project or K-12 project? I would suggest that you go with the non-formal EE project. It gives a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more, I think, oriented towards a nonprofit EE organization. So, continue with questions. I'm thinking of partnering with early childhood organizations around the state, PA, EYC, etc., for teacher workshops for both early childhood and K-2 teachers. Would that be a mini or a general grant? I'm keying in on the organizations around the state. That means it has a Commonwealth Wide or statewide reach, and that would qualify for a general grant. Of course, more specifics in that planning would be required. And also, I'd just add there as a touch of humor that for early childhood and K-2 teachers, a stick and a rock make really great toys. All right, so when looking at riparian buffer projects, how much of the funding and time needs to be designated to the education portion versus the stewardship and the planning portion? I would suggest to you that that is going to be pretty much by a case-by-case basis. Of course, what we'd really like to see is that the end result is that the project's completed, the plantings are completed, say example, a riparian buffer, and therefore you're reducing sediment and nutrients entering your local waterway. But we don't have to look at that sort of thing based on your application. I will give you a tip. I might take a look at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's MeWe program, Meaningful Watershed Educational Experiences. There's framework in there that will give you a good idea of previous projects, how much time they devoted to the classroom, and how much was devoted specifically to the stewardship and implementation of the project. Okay, this is a good question. Would a grant be better rated if it touches on more than one priority topic, for example, environmental justice and climate change? Absolutely. We're looking for projects like that. If you have a project that combines all three, that's going to make for a very strong application. I will remind you, though, just a great idea doesn't make a great application. You have to make sure that you fill out the forms completely and, you know, to be frank, dot the I's and cross the T's. When a grant application is sent in that touches on those priority topics, combines them, that certainly gets us excited, but you still have a requirement to submit a quality application with minimal mistakes. An additional question received is, if a nonprofit is partnering with a school or school district, does it matter who submits the application? Frankly, no, it doesn't. But we will remind you that whoever becomes the lead person on that project, they are the ones specifically responsible for providing the, for example, in a general grant, they would be responsible for the progress report in December. They would be responsible for the final report, all the budget reimbursements, all of the paperwork would be responsible for the lead organization. So can a nonprofit partner with a school district or a school? Of course it can. But just be aware that if you take that leadership role, that DEP will be looking to you to submit the correct paperwork. This audience is very good at putting pertinent questions in front of us. And the next one is, does a statewide conference presentation have to occur during the year grant period, or can it be after the project is completed? No, it is part of the project itself. So if you're presenting at a statewide conference, it needs to be within the parameters of the grant start and end date. So going from July of 2019 to the end of June of 2020. Question, could a municipal EAC be the matching 20% funder? Yes, it could. Again, what I would suggest that in your application, make that very specific, and then if it gets to the point where this office may have questions, of course, we will be in touch with you. Okay, so would a general grant support regional or statewide events, a workshop or conference that provide technical assistance and educational resources to help Pennsylvania organizations implement projects related to the priority issues? Yes, it would. So if you are an organization that has technical expertise, let's say in stormwater management, and you're developing tools that are going to be put towards school districts and educators to be able to address their stormwater issues, that is certainly a topic that you could submit a grant application for. It could be a general grant or a mini grant. The key here is that to remind you that if you're looking at doing, say, 5 conferences based on this type of event for a general grant, it still has to occur within the time frame of the grant itself. So it would go from July 1st of 2019 and end the end of June of 2020. Is a match required for the general grant project proposals for a K-12 school looking to do something like an outdoor classroom? First of all, if you're doing an outdoor classroom for a specific school building or school district, that sounds a lot like a mini grant project to me. I'll remind you that a general grant is going to have a statewide or regional impact. So a lot of mini grants have been utilized over the years to develop outdoor classrooms and outdoor facilities, walking trails on the school district or school building property. But a match is not required for the mini grant program, but if you get into something big, again, a regional or statewide project, match is required. Okay. So I want to thank everybody that participated and was the audience for this year's 2019 DEP EE Grant webinar. Again, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you should have my contact information. And once again, thank you very much, and I wish you the best over the course of the next year in your environmental education endeavors.